Thank you, Karen. So as I said previously, we're filming this for the Spotlight on Seniors show, and it always feels necessary for me to look into the camera and say, welcome to the Spotlight on Seniors show, filmed with LCTV under the sponsorship of the Lincoln Home. And so, I work with the Lincoln Home, and a reasonable question to ask is, because everybody knows the Lincoln Home as a residential care community, and why would we be talking about cognitive health and optimal brain health and preventing dementia? Well, that's become quite a topic. I've done about a dozen conversations with this in the community now, a couple television shows. And so it all started really with our board of directors for the Lincoln Home. We're a smaller, not-for-profit kind of organization. A couple of years ago, strategic planning meeting. And one of the big things that we looked at was, okay, well, we're this, kind of little engine that could make it up the hill. We're a small organization, but what more are we doing in this community to try to help the community? And one of the big initiatives was we're going to provide more education in the community to try to benefit the community at large, and not just the people who might come and reside with us. Well, that's been an important thing, and there's many things that have evolved out of that. One was what we call the dementia-friendly Lincoln County. So trying to work to raise awareness about the challenges of cognitive impairment and dementia in our state, and not our state, our county right here, because, the statistics are kind of scary, and there's no group that I talk to if I say, how many people know someone who's experienced cognitive impairment? Everybody, in some way or other, tends to know someone who has had that experience. It may be a family member, it may be a friend. Just statistically, it's a tough disease. And so part of what I like to start these conversations with is, I have a lot of good news to report, and I'm happy to report that, but I don't want any of that to undermine the idea that Alzheimer's disease and the other related disorders and dementias it's a hard, difficult disease for the person experiencing it and for the people who love them, who are trying to provide care for them, whether that's in a community like ours, a residential care community, or especially at home. It's difficult, it's challenging, it's hard emotional work, and it's hard physical work. So, why do I say that I have good news to report? Well, so I'm going to be talking about a couple new things here that I haven't spoken about previously. One of them is that I, 2 days ago on Tuesday, went to Augusta and attended a meeting put on by the Maine Centers for Disease Control and the Alzheimer's Association. And there is a statewide Maine Healthy Brain Initiative going on right now. This is being taken very seriously. They're trying to increase the public health awareness of primary care physicians and to try to get to an earlier point of detection and more effective forms of diagnosis so that people are tackling this issue earlier in their lives. And why is that? The reason for that is that it's well known now that with Alzheimer's disease, which occupies about 60% of all dementias, that the changes that lead one to that later very difficult disorder tend to start about 20 years younger in one's life. Well, so I can go two routes with this. I've had my own cognitive concerns, and that's one of the things that has led me into doing these talks, because I started, I've been at this for a long time now. I started as a registered nurse when I was 23 years old. I was a kid. And I worked in all kinds of intense hospital environments. I worked in intensive care units. I ended up out in California working in a 60-bed intensive care unit and oncology units, and spent many years in AIDS units when it first hit the hospitals before they even knew how it was diagnosed. Now, I've been in senior care for 25 years, unbelievably, since 1994, and now I'm 66, and so all of a sudden I'm like, wait a minute, I'm an aging person myself, and yeah, some people will say, Ed says to me all the time, Steve, you're just a kid, what are you talking about? He says it to me every day almost. But I'm older enough that I actually get it, I feel it. It's like, oh my God, my knees, what the heck's going on with my knees and my hips? And well, so I started having some experiences with my own ability to organize and ability to plan, and this is how we look at it. We look at, well, what could we do when we were younger, say even 50, and noticing the changes myself. So there's some things that are called normal age-related brain changes. And then there's other things that are kind of like mild cognitive impairment, and I'm going to spend some time talking about that and defining it. And then there's, of course, deeper forms of dementia, and the kind of dementia that scares us all, you know, that because all the studies, so fear of death, that's kind of abstract. You know, we don't, any of us have any crystal balls, but a fear of death is abstract, but survey after survey after survey says people want to hang on to their cognition. We want that. And I know I want that. I don't want to head down the track of dementia. I started first working with the Alzheimer's Association in '94 in Los Angeles, facilitating support groups for caregivers. In Monterey, I was doing support groups for early stage Alzheimer's people that are, if you were just meeting them, you wouldn't have a lot initially meeting them to say, oh, this person has Alzheimer's, but then, or early Alzheimer's, but then as you get into conversations, you realize that even in the early stage, past the mild cognitive impairment, it's difficult for them. So, the statistics. So I'm 66. The statistics are, they're scary statistics that we've heard a million times, and I've been hearing it for decades. At age 65, 13%, 1 in 8 people has Alzheimer's. That's young, right, exactly, right? That's like, seriously, that can't be true, but it is true. And that's borne out true for a couple decades now since I've been aware of these things. By the time one gets to 85, without intervention, without changing anything, the statistics are 50%. Basically, 1 in 2 people at age 85 has severe dementia. That doesn't seem like can be true, but because what happens is the people that travel down that route in their life, come on in, sir. The people that end up traveling down that route in their life, well, they kind of end up disappearing from society. It's not like they're always running around and we're seeing them. So, because I've been involved in this so long, I'm one of many professionals that has spread over the years what I consider to be a dangerous and dysfunctional narrative about dementia. And I can summarize that by saying, well, you know, none of us has a crystal ball, and we don't know what's going to happen to us, but if dementia is going to happen, it's going to happen, and there's not a lot you can do about it. And that narrative has been in our society for a long time, and me as a professional, I've spouted it many times. Well, when I started coming into experiences that caused me to question, whoa, what's happening with me here? You know, and I'm talking about they're the kind of things, not the normal age-related changes, which I'm going to come right back to in a second, but the kind of changes that cause your primary care physician to say, maybe we should get some baseline testing, and maybe you should talk to a neurologist. You know, I've had those experiences. And I had a couple particularly startling experiences professionally that caused me to suddenly look at, wow, this is like, it's like a Holocaust occurring right before our eyes. It's happening to our friends, it's happening to people we love, it's happening to our colleagues. And there was one particular day at the Lincoln home where I was having a lunch conversation with a gentleman who I'm sure many of you in this room would know who that person is, and his wife. He was cognitively impaired, she was not. A typical professional conversation for me. But then up came one of our residents who had worked with him for more than 20 years. Well, this particular resident was also deep into cognitive impairment. And I thought, well, that is really strange, because usually when you're meeting people professionally, they're kind of in their own little silos. It's like you meet this family, and you meet this family, and this person, and this person. But now here's two people. And then not even 3 minutes after the first person came up comes a second person who was his secretary for many years, a couple decades. And all of a sudden I was like, wow, in this group of 4 people, 3 of them are in dementia, and the oldest one is 77. And that just blew my mind. And sitting across from my colleague who is my age, kind of looking at each other eye to eye, and like, damn, this could be happening to us. And I had already had enough experiences in my own thinking that all of a sudden, so everybody that knows me as a very positive, age-positive, passionate narrative, all of that kind of stuff. All of a sudden, it was like someone stuck a pin right in my balloon. Wow. And that shot me last February and March into feelings of just deep despair and anxiety. Just like, oh my God, this is happening to me. I've seen too much of this stuff. I know it's happening to me. And it might take 10 years, but I don't care. I don't want to be there in 10 years. So a fortunate aspect of my own personality is that when I don't clam up, I open up and I start talking to people. And I made a trip out to Wisconsin to see a good buddy of mine who's a hospice chaplain, and I wanted to spend time with him because I knew I could spend 3 days at his house and he would just make space for me and we could talk this stuff through. I have another friend in Portland, we did the same kind of thing. And so when I came back from those 2 trips with these people, it kind of, and this is, if you remember nothing else today, I want you to remember this. If we don't talk about it, we can't do anything about it. And the horrible part of what's evolved in our society is there's been kind of a shame thing about it. And people tend to withdraw from those with cognitive impairment. And I have to say, it's a medical disorder. It's nothing more than that. But people draw away because it scares us. It freaks us out. And sometimes, so what ends up happening is someone that had a big social circle in their lives, they end up kind of, their friends are kind of pulled back and they're not there, and it makes it tough. It makes it tough. But it also makes it so we don't want to talk about it. Now, I'm a professional. I got to say, it is a little bit tricky for me because I do desire to keep working. It is a little tricky for me, for my colleagues, too, for me to get up and say, geez, I've had some like, kind of feelings about my own cognitive processing. But I hang by it. If we don't talk about it, we can't do anything about it. Now, the whole thing that's going on in the state about early detection, one of the reasons that we want to talk about it is there's actually so much that we can do to benefit ourselves, even later on, even if I said before, it starts developing 20 years prior. So just keeping myself in the hot seat here. if we're saying that I was going to evolve cognitive impairment by the time, let's say 75, just to pick an age, 76, because all those people, that was their age, that means those changes started in my brain 10 years or more before. And certainly, by the time one is 45 years old, they should be thinking about their cognitive health. Now, let me take a breath a second. Just kind of focus myself. So let me come back to, I want to describe, first of all, what are we talking about when we're talking about dementia? Because there's one big piece of confusion that I want to clear up. So, and that's been kind of, I don't think anybody ever intentionally promulgated this idea, but it's the idea that any changes in your, especially like mild cognitive impairment, inevitably leads to full-blown dementia. That's not true, despite the statistics. So when we talk about normal age-related brain changes, the kinds of things we're talking about, and that I started noticing a long time ago, just normal stuff. So first of all, our brain processing speed slows down. That happens to virtually everyone. Just gets slower. It's not quite as fast as it used to be. There's another kind of integrative process in our thinking ability. So I can remember, for example, I used to teach a lot of workshops and seminars and that type of thing. And I would have a knowledge of something that I would just be able to have in my hands. And I didn't really have to think about how I had that knowledge, because the brain would kind of automatically pick this and pick this and pick this and access a few different sorts of memories and things that you know that you would never put together before, but then spontaneously put them together. And you have that. Sometimes people call that intuition. But it's kind of like an underlying process. And I started noticing, wow, there's something I should have known and my synapses weren't connecting, and it just wasn't being able to come to mind for me. And it's not memory. It's a different kind of integrative knowing. Visual processing speed slows down. The part of your brain that processes things. So one of the things that leads to driving unsafety is changes in that, visual processing speed. How quickly your brain will respond and react and say, with driving, for example, something's coming out of your visual field. There's what's called a useful field of vision. So you're driving along and there's something over here, but your useful field of vision is shrunk down and it processes slower, and you don't see it, and suddenly you're out in an intersection and someone's T-boning you. It's that kind of thing. Auditory processing speed slows down. So all these things, and I'm not talking about hearing loss, which is related to ear function itself. I'm talking about how the brain actually processes sound. So there's a very interesting guy. His name's Michael Merzenich. And the first thing that I discovered that started really giving me a feeling of like, okay, wow, this maybe is not all inevitable after all. Maybe there's something I can actually do, was a cognitive training program called Brain HQ. Now, Michael Merzenich is a neuroscientist, and he was the inventor of the cochlear implant. And does everybody know what that is? So the cochlear implant is, it's outside your skull. It's kind of like a device, and there's wires that go into the auditory nerves and connects to the brain itself. It bypasses the ear, and the impulses, hearing impulses, go directly to that part of the brain connected to hearing. And so the early developers, he was on one team, and there were other teams concurrently developing this cochlear implant. And they were all using different kinds of programming protocols and different engineering and hardware. And they were all getting positive results. And they were all talking to each other and saying, well, how could this happen? Well, what they discovered was it wasn't their engineering that was improving as these cochlear implants started working effectively. It was that the brain itself was adapting itself to the new input coming through hearing. Now, what's significant about that? It's this fantastic word that I love, and it's called neuroplasticity. And what neuroplasticity is the ability of the brain, the 80-plus-year-old brain, the 90-year-old brain, the 70-year-old brain, to form new synapses and new nerve cells. Now, the reason that's important is it wasn't all that long ago that it was thought that the brain, you were born with all the brain cells you're ever going to have. Then in early infancy, there's a die-off of a bunch of brain cells because it was like they made too many and okay, let's get rid of a bunch of them. But then after that, it's just you go through your life and whether you die at 40 or 80, it's just kind of slow attrition. That was the belief. And that turns out not to be true at all. We can form new brain cells based on the stimulus that we give ourselves. So this Michael Merzenich, neuroscientist, developer of the Brain HQ program, goes on to develop, once they proved neuroplasticity, which that won Nobel Prizes and all that, once they proved that, they were like, well, can you train attention? Can you train visual processing speed? Can you train auditory processing speed? Can you train memory? Can you train these elemental functions? So picture it like this. Like an Olympic sprinter, he goes to the Olympics and he's going to run, an event that lasts 10 seconds. But he trains in many, many, many things to give him the fundamental skills in order to get out there and boom, hit that 10 seconds and set whatever records he's going to set. It's the same thing with this kind of brain training. It's kind of like going to the gym. And it trains these elemental functions in the brain, which actually, factually, has been proven through advanced scanning techniques to stimulate new nerve production, new synapse connection, and a host of other structural things in the brain and biochemical things in the brain that improve performance. So the first thing I had done was I signed up for this program. I said, all right, I'm going to try this thing. And I was probably about 3 weeks into it, and I was like, yeah, I think I feel something. I think I feel some positive effects. Okay, great. But now I've had about 115 training days in it. When I first started that program, so the program is structured to keep you at about an 80% success rate in the different challenges it gives you, which are over 700 different kinds of things that it gives you over time. But that also is saying that it keeps you at a 20% fail rate. And that's what actually is the stimulus that causes your brain, which is actually the most complex thing that we know of in the universe. We don't know of anything more complex, no matter what our computer engineering has been. It causes the brain to adapt. It's an evolutionary thing. The brain will adapt to the stimulus. So these elemental skills influence many other parts of your life, just like the sprinter who's doing the workouts sprints better. When I first started that program, it had me ranked for my age group at the 61st percentile. And so meaning 39% of my age group had better cognitive processing than I did, which I didn't really like that, actually, to tell you the truth. And now I'm at the 86th percentile after about 100. So, not much of an investment of time. I started doing it 5 days a week. I said to myself, all right, I'm going to be the Arnold Schwarzenegger of Brain HQ. Great, so now I do it about 3 times a week and about 30 minutes a session. I do it the same way that I go to the gym to lift weights or to play pickleball or to get on the treadmill. It's a workout. And it's effective, and it started giving me a feeling of hope. Now, I want to close that out and just say one more thing about it, is that it has incredible scholarly scientific support behind it. There's been 3 massive studies with people in their 70s and older, and there's been over 140 scholarly articles written on the effectiveness of this program. So cognitive training, that's one thing. What are the other things that we can do? The big one, every group agrees with, is exercise. Exercise is fundamental. We have to do it. Ed's on the bike 5 miles a day. He's down there cranking away at it. I see him all the time. Bonnie's there saying, come on, Ed, come on, Ed. But that's so important for so many reasons. So what are the types of exercise that we can do for ourselves? Okay, so this should be no big surprise, right? I mean, come on, the brain, the body, vasculature, we all exercise. We need to get the blood flowing. We need to get the heart beating. And we need to do it enough times in a week to maintain our vascular health, to help our metabolism stay in shape. Everything's connected. There's no separation. It's not like, well, we're doing an exercise here, but it's all connected. So I always feel like, primary care physicians. Can you imagine people come in to see you and the guy says, now he's got his 14-minute visit with you, and he's trying to play detective. He's trying to figure out, okay, well, how can I help this person today? And hopefully we go in prepared to have a good conversation so he can actually help us and not have to play detective. But they say to us, you need some exercise. You need to eat right. And do we? Yeah, not so much. Why? There's a scourge of type 2 diabetes in our society. There just is. There's a scourge of obesity in our society. There just is. And the conclusion I've come to, because I am definitely prone to type 2 diabetes, had it on both sides of my family. I had the genetic testing. It's right there. I know it. Somehow, all the public education and the fears, I mean, my own father, and by the way, the many years I spent in hospitals, which all those intensive care units, what are they populated with? They're populated with diseases of civilization. That's what they are. When I first entered it, I was all like, save lives, curing people, fight disease, relieve suffering, Well, I thought it was going to be car accidents and things like that, or cancers, and those other things. But no, so much of it is just like things we do to ourselves. But taking it a step further, you almost have to be a social subversive in this society to maintain your health. I have people every day. Steve, have a cookie. Hey, just yesterday I walk into my office, there's a bag bigger than a movie bucket of buttered popcorn. And this guy knows I like buttered popcorn. But why do I have to have it on my desk at work? Why do I have to have people giving me donuts? What? It's just everywhere. You can't get away from it. Friday night, I'm going to be going to a potluck, and it's holiday. And then Saturday, some other potluck. And I'm like, oh, my God. Because I like to eat. I just do. And so many of us do. But in our generation, especially post-World War II, my God, the food manufacturers just switched over to processed food, and all that stuff is garbage. We need to eat whole food, fresh food. And so that's why and one of the big risk factors, by the way, is the type 2 diabetes in our society. It's one of the big risk factors. I call it the gateway disease, and the reason I call it the gateway disease is that cardiovascular disease, strokes, high blood pressure. It just ruins us when we head down that track of insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes, and is a huge, huge risk factor for Alzheimer's and cognitive impairment. So we need to exercise. We need to have our diet in order. And if you're someone like me, who actually, I'm not a diabetic, but I am insulin resistant, meaning, for me, there's no such thing as healthy whole grain bread. I can't do it. And the reason I know it is, along with, if you don't talk about it, you can't do anything about it. If you don't measure it, you can't manage it. I check my blood sugars, and I've done experiments. I'm like, okay, I'm eating well all day, and let's have a sandwich. But the best bread, you know, Borealis bread, and terrific stuff. Boom, blood sugar's up. And stays up for a long time. So we have to manage our blood sugars. Exercise, diet, sleep. Tell me the name of the book. You said it to me right at the beginning. What's the name of it?
Why We Sleep.
Why We Sleep. It's a big bestseller on the New York Times bookseller list right now. So Matthew Walker, fantastic book. And I've listened to this guy so I'm obsessive about listening to podcasts. I like finding the super smart researchers, talking to the other super smart researchers, and they're in conversation. So sleep is actually considered almost ahead of diet in terms of the risk. Why? What does sleep do for us? So there's a part of the brain. So you're going through your day. You're hearing me right now. Your brain is absorbing some things, and it's going to hang out in a part of the brain called the hippocampus. The hippocampus is shaped like a seahorse. It's kind of in the deep brain. The short-term memory hangs out there during the day, but it's when you go to sleep at night that short-term memory transfers up to the cortex of the brain and becomes stored as long-term memory. So it's memory, but then also there's this other piece that's a relatively new discovery. There's a researcher, a woman, Miter Nedergaard, in the Netherlands, and she received some big science award for discovering a part of the brain that they call the glymphatic system. The glymphatic system is similar to the lymphatic system in the body. The lymphatic system is basically meant to detoxify, haul out toxins, clean up the cellular debris, because all of our cells are functioning and metabolizing all day, but they create garbage. So picture this. Cook a fabulous meal for all your friends, but then there's all the leftovers and stuff, and it's in the trash, and you don't throw it out. And then the next day you have some friends over for breakfast, and you cook up again, and you don't throw it out. Well, when you're sleeping is when the glymphatic system is working in the brain. All day long when you're awake, you're creating metabolic waste. Then in deep sleep is when the glymphatic system, so we produce a ½ liter a day of cerebral spinal fluid, half a pint a day of cerebral spinal fluid. And even right now, that fluid, if you had an image of your brain, it's pumping, it's pumping, it's pumping. But it's not cleaning, it's circulating. But it's deep sleep, the deepest sleep of the night, when the garbage gets cleaned out. So I won't ask any men to raise their hands, but again, if you can't talk about it, you can't do it, so I'm the one that's going to talk about it. Damn it, I hate getting up at night to have to pee. And I know a lot of you have that same issue. Well, so what does Matthew Walker talk about? He talks about the 4 pillars of sleep. A, depth. B, duration. C, continuity. D, regularity. So the depth of our sleep in a normal cycle of sleep at night, you're going to have, you kind of first go into a kind of a short-term non-REM sleep that's kind of a deeper sleep, then you come out. Then you go through a few cycles of REM sleep, and then you go back down into deeper states. Well, if you're getting interrupted 3 times in a night, and especially what I hate, oh, it drives me nuts, and it happened to me last night. I just hate it. You go to sleep, and then you get up, and I'm up at 2 o'clock in the morning. So the big question is, all right, am I going to get right back to sleep? Right? Or am I going to lay awake till 4 in the morning and hope to get another hour of sleep because I have a big talk today, and I don't want to be a lame brain? That's what it happened to me last night. It happens frequently, and it is why that for me, sleep has attracted my attention as the biggest thing that I really need to heal and solve in my life. There's a lot of ways that we can do that. There's a lot of things to address. We want to address our sleep hygiene. We want to make sure that we have some kind of regular pattern. And again, you're going to get the links, the notes, and all this stuff. It'll all come in the email. We need to have a sleep hygiene where we try to get to bed at a regular time. We try to pay attention to our circadian rhythms. We try to make sure, especially in these dark winter hours, that we get exposed to some daylight, sun and daylight coming into our eyes, because that actually is a signal to our brain about how our body will cycle through the day and the night. And especially if you have to stay inside a lot during the day, that can be a real negative influencer. So that's the regularity and the continuity of the sleep. Again, so I won't keep on this point except to say sleep is crucial. You have to really think about the quality of your sleep, and what they mean by quality is electrical quality, and to the best of your ability, try to solve it. And like I said, for me, that's my greatest anxiety. That's what keeps me on edge about this stuff, because I have to say, for me doing all these talks, like when I first discovered the neuroplasticity, I was like, all right, Brain HQ, I got this. But all this sleep business, I'm like, okay, well, I got to do some work on my sleep. And I've been trying. For me, the one thing I found that seems to be, oh, by the way, without taking a bunch of pills. That's the other thing. We have to try to do it without the sleep meds. Some of the sleep meds that get to us, those by themselves create a risk for cognitive impairment. Ambien, number one. Ambien really creates, it's got a black label box, and wow, well, what's the point of taking it if you're trying to prevent cognitive impairment? So let's see, we said exercise, diet, sleep, cognitive training. Sorry, Dave, I don't mean to touch that. Let me just take a brief pause here, because I got to be conscious of time too. Oh, I talked about, all right, so I'm going to talk about a physician, Dale Bredesen. So Dale Bredesen wrote a book, another New York Times bestseller, with the outrageous title of The End of Alzheimer's: How We Can Reverse Cognitive Impairment and Alzheimer's Disease. And when I first heard that title, I was like, what kind of snake oil is this guy selling? Because it really gripes me when our most vulnerable population is exploited, and there is, guaranteed, a lot of snake oil out there. People selling products to keep your brain healthy and, get all this stuff, and the stuff is worthless, So, but I read this guy's book, and I've listened to countless hours of him talking, and he's been at this track since 1998. And if what he's saying is true, and he has some so he's a physician, he's a clinical researcher, he has published articles, and he has some early results. He had a group of 10 patients with significant cognitive impairment, and he put them on this, what he calls a RECODE protocol, reversal of cognitive decline. And if what he's saying is true, the guy is a true paradigm shifter. And I love paradigm shifters, because they're the people that take thinking out of a place where it was stuck for a long time and they bring it to a whole new place. Now, so the big pharmaceutical companies for years now, everybody's heard of amyloid plaque. It's almost impossible you haven't. Amyloid plaque buildup in the brain has been the target of pharmaceutical research. If we can just remove the amyloid plaque, Alzheimer's will get better. Well, they poured billions into that research. And believe me, I told you, I've done the fundraising. I've done the 10K runs when I could run in my 40s. I've done organizing the walks. I've done all that kind of stuff. I've contributed to the research for years. And why? I'll tell you, I was a big believer coming out of AIDS care, 7 years in AIDS units from a sure death sentence, and over those 7 years seeing hundreds of deaths, seriously. And by the way, some of the most beautiful work I ever did, and heart-moving work that I ever did. But I left that care right at a time when the research had changed the game. And AIDS went from being an absolute sure death sentence to now a very manageable disease. And I was like, yeah, you take the brightest minds and you give them the money and they'll do it. They'll figure it out. And I always thought that that would be true of Alzheimer's. I've always thought that. But we haven't had a new drug approved since 2003. The last drug that was approved was memantine. 2003, that's 16 years now. And the thinking is shifting, and this Dale Bredesen is now talking about amyloid in the brain not as the cause, well, not that, I want to make sure I say this correctly, just so it's clear. So amyloid itself, yes, is a neurotoxin if it builds up. Remember I was talking about taking out the trash. So if we don't take out the trash in our brains, clean it up with the lymphatic system, and he posits, his hypothesis that's working from, is that amyloid is actually created by the brain to protect it from various insults. And he identifies some 36, what he calls holes in the roof, some 36 factors that can make it so that your brain produces amyloid. Now, it's all about inflammation. Inflammation, it's been known for a long time. So he looks at 3 big factors, kind of a fourth. But so inflammation. Now, what are the causes of inflammation in our lives? Well, the foods we eat are a big cause, number one. Becoming contaminated, or not contaminated, but if our bodies over our lives have absorbed heavy metal, and there's some people with heavy metal toxicity, so mercury, cadmium, lead, and if there gets to be a zinc insufficiency and a change in how copper and zinc relates to us, those things create inflammation, and the brain forms amyloid plaque in order to protect itself. Well, okay, so you get some amyloid plaque in your 40s, you get it in your 50s, but then it builds up, and you don't get enough sleep, and you don't take out the trash, and that is one of the big factors that he talks about inflammation. The other one, so that creates inflammation, is sugar toxicity. And believe me, it's kind of an addictive drug. I mean, it's like, you get this chocolate cake, it's delicious. Your brain loves it. Your brain responds to it. And if you're one of those people who are tending towards getting on that roller coaster with sugar, well, you're not doing your brain any favors, And the big stuff of all this is, well, how can we learn to be kind to our mind? So I walk into this healthy aging symposium thing, and I'm one of the speakers there, and I'm moderating a panel, and there's this huge table, and it was nothing but muffins and sugars and cookies and cakes, and I'm like, isn't this a little ironic? We're talking about healthy aging here, and this is supposed to be the deal of the day. But who wants to have a bunch of carrots and celery? I guess, I don't know. Let's have a table full of kale, for God's sakes. So it's, like I said, you have to be subversive if you're going to survive all this stuff. All right, so I entertained myself there for a second, and I lost track of where I was going. So we're talking about Dale Bredesen and the factors that lead into this. So I said the heavy metals, the sugar toxicity leads to inflammation. Now I'll tell you, so it's funny for me, because when I fell into I was doing really good with my health. I lost a ton of weight. I'm just swimming in the ocean and lifting weights and feeling really good. And then when I fell into that deep despair and anxiety, I got onto the sugar train, put weight back on. But what I really noticed was that the inflammation is not just your brain. It's like, my knees are killing me. What the heck is going on? I cut out the sugar, the knee pain goes away. I get back to the sugar, the knee pain comes back. It's inflammatory, and that inflammation is affecting the inside of your blood vessels, and then combining with all the fats and plaques and all that to create coronary occlusions and heart attacks and strokes. And that inflammation is affecting your joints. It just is. And so, it's like, all right, well, I'd like to not have a knee replacement at some later point in my life, because the inflammation is arthritis. It's just, and what that inflammation does, okay, that's a fancy word. Well, what's it doing? What's rotting the cartilage in your knees and your hips, rotting it, and then you end up bone on bone, and you get very well qualified surgeons making a lot of money to replace your knee for you, because we can do that these days. So the Bredesen protocol, oh my God, look at that. Jeez. I get going, I can't stop. So, the stuff I'm telling you today, by the way, so what I'm doing is, all this is, every one of these is kind of a deep dive. Starting in February, I'm going to be teaching a coastal senior college course on optimal brain health. I'm going to kind of close it out a little prematurely in terms of, because who wants to keep listening to me? But I'll send you these links. So the book that I'm writing, first announcement here, and I haven't trademarked the name yet. Spence, don't go stealing it. Calling it a do-it-yourself guide to optimal brain health. But I will point out immediately the paradox to that is we're not meant to do this stuff by ourselves. And it is well shown now that behavioral change is difficult, and just by the type 2 diabetes. We all say we want to be healthier, but somehow it's hard. It's just the most obsessive people, it seems, that really can keep it going. I can be disciplined for a while, but then I fall off or stress or something. So now, we got the Center for Disease Control. They're making cognitive health a big public health issue. There's a few different statewide programs. There's one right here in Lincoln County in Portland. They call it Project Echo. They're training physicians to be more aware of these kinds of issues. But nobody's going to save us if we don't take the responsibility to do it ourselves. That's where the do-it-yourself comes from. But we're not meant to do this stuff by ourselves, and I am totally convinced that what we need is in the public health system and among our friends or church groups, kind of like peer-to-peer support, where we educate ourselves about the things that we can do to support our brain health. We educate ourselves about that. And then we connect with people who have that same concern, and kind of like check-in groups, and where, it can come in many forms. There's some kind of like accountability and support with each other so that people can actually, factually, make the changes that will help them keep their cognitive health intact. This Dale Bredesen that I was speaking of, his approach to it as a physician is he puts you through a huge series of lab tests and all the different kinds of things. There's at least a couple of physicians I know of that are going to start integrating that kind of protocol around here. And he looks at the things like heavy metal toxicity and all those kinds of things. That's a very sophisticated approach, and for me, I look at the low-hanging fruit. I know that I can actually get control of my diet. I know that I can exercise. I know that I can really focus on my sleep, these elemental things. I know that I can focus on the cognitive brain training, which, by the way, is also part of the Bredesen protocol. And then if I get more seriously concerned, I'll be looking at heading down that path. I've actually kind of halfway in between whether I'm going to work with him as a physician or not, or someone trained in his methods. So I just want to say the most important part of all this is kind of like a self-love and self-compassion and a being kind to your mind. And in the spirit of a dementia-friendly Lincoln County, what we want to do is to have room in our society for people who are out in the world with cognitive impairment, and we treat them with kindness, we treat them with respect, we treat them with acceptance, and we make it so that people don't have to hide away by themselves in a home with a caregiver. And if there's one other point you take away today, it's that be kind to your own mind and be kind to others. So, any questions? Catherine?
You started a sentence that said, the best exercise is.
Yes. So there needs to be cardio, and you also want some resistance training. And the minimum recommendation is about 150 minutes a week. And if you can get three sessions of cardio, so 5 times 30 minutes, if you can get a few sessions of cardio in, and you can get some resistance training in, and we all have to be conscious of our age and our joint health. You don't want to overstress joints. And so you need to lift. So what I've reverted to, I used to, it wasn't that long ago, I could put 300 pounds on my shoulders and do squats. My knee doesn't like that. It really doesn't. And a lot of this is about joint preservation. So I've gone to much lighter weights and more repetitions in terms of resistance. Paul?
I have a question regarding sugar, as you mentioned. Two-part question. One is, what's the relationship between sugar and inflammation? And secondly, this is a very naive question. I thought the only quote food the brain uses is sugar.
Okay. Okay, so I have a number of soapboxes and a number of rabbit holes I can dive into, and I can get on a soapbox and take a deep dive into a rabbit hole in that question. So I want to keep the answer short enough. The brain actually, there's only one part of the brain requires glucose, but for only about 20% of its energy needs. There's another factor, I didn't even really get into this, but it's nutritional ketosis. Probably people have heard of it. The general recommendations now from the people that I consider on the cutting edge of this is that, so nutritional ketosis is you really limit the carbs in your life. And when I'm at my healthiest, I eat very, very few carbs, and I eat a lot of healthy fats. And your body switches over to burning a ketone called beta-hydroxybutyrate, and the brain survives very nicely on beta-hydroxybutyrate. The spectrum of diets could be an Atkins diet, and then it gets more tightly controlled, paleo, and then nutritional ketosis, so that your brain and your body and your muscle systems becomes what's called keto-adapted, burning fats preferentially to carbohydrates for energy. And the fact is, you could actually get by with pretty much zero carbohydrates because your liver has the ability to convert protein to carbohydrate. Your body will not run it. You'd have to be in such severe wasted starvation mode to not have enough carbohydrates to operate that part of the brain. So there's a lot behind that, but that's the short story.
What are healthy fats?
Like so there's a balance between what they call omega-6s and omega-3s. So I keep, like, for example, a bunch of cans of sardines and smoked oysters and mackerel in my office at work. And when I'm being good, if I'm not succumbing to donuts and stuff, then it's it's a can of sardines. Those are healthy fats. Avocados are healthy fats. Walnuts are healthy fats. Olive oil, avocado oil, sunflower seeds. So and it's the way our body processes fats. And by the way, another big risk factor too that I want to mention that I didn't mention before, trans fats like margarines and stuff like that, that is definitely toxic. Your liver just doesn't handle it, and the body doesn't handle it. That creates, it's highly inflammatory. And the other one, a big factor, risk factor, that your doctor will always help you with is blood pressure. You've got to control your blood pressure. And that's one of my saving graces, because I do like exercise, and I exercise a lot, so my blood pressure is always pretty good. But so I have a friend, a good friend, someone I care about, and she's like, oh, my doctor wants me to go on blood pressure medication. I'm not doing that. I'm like, Diane, what are you talking about? Control your blood pressure. Blood pressure is too high, super high risk factor. Something like 73% of people with Alzheimer's had at some point in their life untreated hypertension, because it affects everything. Sorry? Yeah, Paul?
Is there any correlation between stress and mental impairment?
The correlation would be, so there's a stress hormone called cortisol. Now, and this is one of the ways that lack of sleep raises your cortisol levels, creates more inflammation, ties in with, there's a well-known relationship between high cortisol levels and insulin resistance, leading into type 2 diabetes. People who don't manage their stress well and don't have a good level of resilience in their life have those high cortisol levels. One of the other interventions that's a very positive one that I've spoken on previously is mindfulness practices, which is a big thing in medicine these days. So many of the hospitals, right here at Miles, we have, there's, I forget her name, it eluded me for the moment, but they teach mindfulness classes there. Very good thing to engage to help lower those cortisol levels, manage stress. It's an important question and a good one. So I'm going to close out the Spotlight on Seniors show. This has been another episode of Spotlight on Seniors. We will see you next time.